Well, hello everyone. I promised I'd do this new kind of extra bit of learning each week, and this is my first attempt. So do bear with me as I'm learning myself, just like you in many ways. So I'm going to show you how we do reciprocal teaching. I'm going to model the answer, and I'm also going to reinforce some of the ideas that we've looked at last week. So I'm going to pretend that I've never read this book, and I'm going to show you how uh, advanced readers work with texts. If I was browsing for a bookshop and I brought this out of the shelf and looked at it, the first thing I would think is, okay, so it's obviously about families and animals, but it's I would say, slightly controversial. My family and other animals. So he's suggesting his family are animals. Many of us are not comfortable with that idea. So it's quite a startling and controversial title. The next thing I would do would flick it over, and I haven't photographed the back, so you just have to assume I know. So it would normally have either a very brief summary of the text, or sometimes it's quotes from other famous people that read it and are recommending it. Okay, so let's move on to the next step. The next step would be to turn over the page and then look at the mini introduction that it tells the publisher, gives you a kind of brief sort of bio about the character, and here it is. So Gerald Dowell was born in Jamshedpur, India in 1925. In 1928, his family returned to England, and in 1933, they went to live on the continent. Eventually, they settled on the island of Corfu, where they lived until 1939. During this time, he made a special study of zoology and kept a large number of the local wild animals as pets. In 1945, he joined the staff at Whipsnade Park, it was a zoo, as a student keeper. In 1947, he financed, organised, and led his first animal collecting expedition to the Cameroons. This was followed by a second expedition in 1948 and a third in 1949, this time to British Guiana. He has also made expeditions to Paraguay, Argentina, and Sierra Leone. In 1962, he and his wife went to New Zealand, Australia, and Malaya to film a TV series, Two in the Bush, in conjunction with the BBC Natural History Film Unit. In 1958, he founded the Jersey Zoological Park, of which he is the director, and in 1964, he founded the Jersey Wildlife Preservation Trust. Remember, I may have mentioned it in some classes that this is one of my books from school, from I think 1975, 1976. So it's writing in the present tense. Gerald Dowell's still alive at this time. He's now long dead. So I now know it's a non-fiction book. He loves animals. He's got a degree in zoology. He's travelled the world. So it's a non-fiction text. But I'd still be asking myself, why the link between my family and other animals? So this is the introduction now. As an advanced reader, I'd either be thinking subconsciously or consciously of, why has he called it the speech for the defence? And then he's got a quote from Alice Through the Looking Glass, which is a children's novel, very eccentric one with lots of crazy eccentric characters in it. Now, perhaps then he's making the defence for what he's about to say. I'll go back to that in a minute. This is the story of a 5-year sojourn. Sojourn means a brief stay in somewhere else, that I and my family made on the Greek island of Corfu. It was originally intended to be a mildly nostalgic account of the natural history of the island, but I made a grave mistake by introducing my family into the book in the first few pages. Having got themselves on paper, they then proceeded to establish themselves and invite various friends to share the chapters. So here he's doing something really interesting. He's giving the characters on the page a life of their own that they can somehow decide that they're going to be in a book. It's his book. If he actually wanted to write just about animals, he could have done. Okay? So maybe he's going back to the sort of subtitle, maybe he's defending himself against, the inclusion of his family. And he goes on to say, it was only with the greatest difficulty and by exercising considerable cunning. Notice a little bit of alliteration there. Let's see if I can easily highlight it. Work, damn you, work. There we go. And by exercising considerable cunning, that I managed to retain a few pages here and there which I could devote exclusively to animals. It's almost like he didn't have a choice. Well, he did. He really did have a choice. So he's doing something very literary here. He's making characters on the page have some kind of life of their own. Right, let's move on. So this is the first two paragraphs of chapter 1. I'm going to read the paragraph through and then I will go back and show you some important techniques. Maybe you can spot them yourself. July had been blown out like a candle by a biting wind that ushered in a leaden August sky. A sharp, stinging drizzle fell, billowing into opaque grey sheets when the wind caught it. Along the Bournemouth seafront, the beach huts turned blank wooden faces towards a greeny grey, frost-chained sea that leapt eagerly at the cement bulwark of the shore. The gulls had been tumbled inland over the town, and they now drifted above the housetops on taut wings, whining peevishly. It was a sort of weather calculated to try anyone's endurance. So I'm going to ask you, and then I know I can't hear your response, but July had been blown out like a candle. Blown out like a candle. So we have alliteration. That could be accidental, but it's still alliteration. But blown out like a candle is definitely on purpose, and that's a simile. By a biting wind that ushered in. Now, the wind can't usher in anything. That's ushers are the people that direct you to your seats in cinemas and theatres. So that's a human characteristic. So that must mean it's a, personification. A sharp, stinging drizzle fell. Well, that's definitely alliteration, isn't it? Or with that z, it's beginning to sound quite like sibilance. Opaque is a beautiful word. It means something you can't see through vaguely. It's kind of like half see-through. Think of mist, misty panes. Opaque grey sheets when the wind caught it. Along the Bournemouth seafront, the beach huts turned blank wooden faces towards a greeny grey froth-chained sea. So beach huts don't really have faces, so there we have some more personification. And the froth-chained sea that leapt eagerly. Okay, again, sea can't be eager. Eager means enthusiasm and keenness. Okay, so that again is a personification. The gulls had been tumbled inland over the town. The wind is so strong that they couldn't fly properly, so they've been pulled into the town, and they now drifted above the housetops on taut wings, whining peevishly. You all know the sound that seagulls make, I'm sure. We hear them in London, in fact. But peevishly means annoyed. Clearly, seagulls, annoyed is a kind of human emotion. So again, strong use of personification. It was the sort of weather calculated to try anyone's endurance. Same for the second paragraph. Considered as a group, my family was not a very prepossessing sight that afternoon, while we would have to clarify this word for sure. Okay, let's come out of the prepossessing. means attractive. Okay. Considered as a group, my family was not a very prepossessing, attractive sight that afternoon, for the weather had brought with it the usual selection of ills to which we were prone. I might ask the question, as you might have noticed, they were born in India, they were Anglo-Indian, and they moved back to Britain. You could ask, well, were they used to the heat of India, and now they were in gloomy Bournemouth in the winter? That's a question. It's an open question for discussion. Not, I'm not expecting a yes or no answer there, but it's certainly a question to be asked. For me, lying on the floor, labelling my collection of shells, it had brought catarrh. That's when your nasal cavities fill up, pouring into my skull like cement. Oh, that's a strong simile there. Pouring into my skull like cement, so that I was forced to breathe stertorously through my mouth. Well, we have to look that term up, don't we? That is clarifying again. Look up. So that means breathing noisy and laboured, because he's blocked up in his nose, so he's breathing through his mouth. For my brother Leslie, hunched dark and glowering by the fire, it had inflamed the convolutions of his ears so that they bled delicately but persistently. Again, we will have to look up, I think, convolutions. So it means complexity and twist. A thing that is complex and difficult to follow. So it inflamed the difficult parts of his ears, the convolutions of his ears, so that they bled delicately but persistently. To my sister Margot, it delivered a fresh dappling of acne spots to a face that was already blotched like a red veil. Okay, now you could say, okay, this is an open question. Is he being vaguely kind of sexist here? For the boys, they've just got medical problems, but the girl has got problems about their appearance. All teenagers have acne. That's the spots you get on your face mainly. But that focus on appearance rather than illness, again, it's an open question. Some would agree, some would disagree. That's the beauty of reading. All right. For my mother, there was a rich, bubbling cold and a twinge of rheumatism. Now, that might be a word that some of you may need to look up, some of you not. Rheumatism is a condition causing chronic or often intermittent pain affecting the joints or connective tissue. All right, pain usually in the hands and feet. No, usually in the hands, I think. Maybe ankles, I'm not sure. Not being a doctor, I'm not sure about that. Okay, only my eldest brother, Larry, was untouched, but it was sufficient that he was irritated by our failings. So, reciprocal teaching. You predict, and then as you are reading, you may ask open questions. If you're on your own reading, then you just ask them in your mind, of course. If you're doing it together, then you would ask each other. Clarifying is specific words. For example, opaque, prepossessing. What does that mean? Doesn't necessarily mean just words. It could be a whole sentence that you're finding confusing. You say, what does that sentence mean? So you must be very clear on the difference. Clarifying is, what does that actually mean? Word or sentence. Questioning is more open and it can get broader and broader, more deeper, more academic. That's up to the individual person or the group. And finally, you summarize. Did the text that you were predicted at the beginning, did it deliver what you predicted? Now, I would say not exactly, okay? Now, it's a non-fiction book. It's about predominantly his love of animals, but his family, as is said, aggressively as individual characters on the pages of the book, force themselves in. But I would also say that actually, even though it's non-fiction, there is this literary allusion here. There is the very clear use of irony and the idea of characters forcing themselves onto pages. There's the very strong use of simile and personification in the text. So although it's non-fiction, it very, very clearly uses techniques that you would associate with fiction. And guess what? AQA, even though paper 2 is non-fiction, there is a very strong focus on what they like to call literary non-fiction. And this is what we have here, literary non-fiction. Okay, so I hope this has been a further help to you in looking at language features, linguistic devices, whatever term we use, whatever class, various from functional skills to GCSE. And also, I hope that it starts to get you thinking about the difference between non-fiction and fiction and the overlap between the two. So thank you very much, and I will see you next week.